Good morning, everyone. My name is Raina Ghazi, and I'm the Teacher Development Manager for Macmillan Education International Curriculum. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this morning in the UK with Charlotte Rance, who will be focusing on accuracy versus fluency in the young learner classroom. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box that you can see. Of course, please do stick to the topics at hand, which I'm sure, as always, you will. In terms of the PowerPoint and the webinar certificate, these will both be provided via email as soon as the session finishes. So I will pass it over to Charlotte now. Thank you.
Thank you, Raina. Hello, everybody. Okay, let's just check that you can hear and see me and the slides okay. So in the chat box, if you can type where you are and what time it is with you. Let's see where we all are in the world and what time of day we are in. Hello, everybody. Yes, we've got some people from Iran, from Russia, from Kuwait midday in Moscow. Lovely. 2:30 here. Where is here, Ashvin? I didn't catch. 12 o'clock in Saudi Arabia, Petersburg. Hello. Hello, Drusilda from Jamaica. What time is it in Jamaica? I'm not sure. 11 o'clock in South Africa. Yep. 10 o'clock here in the UK. I am in Brighton on the south coast. It is a bright blue sky today, but it is very cold. Hello Almaty, hello Ecuador, hello India, where it's 2:30 in the afternoon. Very nice. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, regardless of where you are, and welcome to our webinar. As Raina said, we are here today to talk about accuracy versus fluency and looking at the young learner's grammar classroom. What implications does it have on our lives as teachers and on our instruction in the classroom, and hopefully getting to grips with a few tips, tricks, etc., that we can help to provide support for our young learners in our classrooms. So, our session today, we're going to start by thinking a little bit about young language acquisition, both for native speakers of any language and second language, third language, fourth language speakers as well. We're going to have a think about accuracy and fluency and what those mean to us. And then we're going to spend the rest of the session talking about how we can support and encourage these behaviours in our classrooms. So if you are ready, let's get going. Right. Young language acquisition. So much research has been done on how children acquire languages, and those of you that are parents and those of you that teach very, very young learners will know that it's amazing. The changes happen on a daily basis in terms of what children can and cannot say in their mother tongues, allowing them to make themselves understood, developing all of the language, all of the structures that they need to get their point across. It's a process of trial and error. We experiment, we learn, we make mistakes, we get positive feedback and positive reinforcement when what we try to say gets the result we hope for. But what we can see, and what we know from all of this research that's happened over decades and decades and decades, is that young learners, regardless of their first language, follow very similar processes in terms of their language acquisition. So, starting from around 18 months, about a year and a half old, we see the beginnings of sentence structure happening. Within young learners, they are developing the ability to string words together and make simple sentences. By around 24 months, we start to see real grammatical structures emerging, regardless of the language they are learning. And of course, as they develop, they begin to experiment, they begin to learn more. So around 30 months, we start to see this idea of backward progress. And backward progress is one of my favorite terms in language acquisition because obviously these two words mean opposite things. How do we progress? By going backwards. But we see this all the time. Examples from native English speaking children will be things like over application of certain grammatical rules. So, for example, when a child is listening to adults, they very quickly hear that in past tense we talk about go, we say went. And you'll find very naturally that children in England will start to use the word went when they're talking about the past. But of course, then they learn that we add ed to talk about the past as well. And as we start seeing them going to school, going to nursery, and they start learning rules and applying rules, we see an over application happening. So a child might spend Wednesday using went perfectly correctly, but by Friday they've started saying wented. And yes, as we can see from Marjorie's comment there, it's all about the way that the brain works. We learn a rule, we want to apply it to everything. But of course, what we do see is that throughout the school years, those basic foundational ground working acquisitions that we have as very young children get expanded on, get mastered. That backward progress, it's a continuing process. The more we learn, the more we over apply and learn to balance, to negotiate, to find out how the rules fit. Of course, in an international context, the reality is that our students in the classroom have lots of different levels of experience. In an international classroom, we'll often find that there are some children who are native speakers or native-like, fully bilingual children, coupled with those that are learning English as a second language or a third language. And the good news is that the acquisition of a second language or a bilingual language, as a second mother tongue or a second foreign language or other language, the process is the same. We go through the same stages as we acquire it. Of course, what we do see with our young learners is a lot of code switching. In the box, can anybody give me a definition? What does code switching mean? Are we familiar with this term? If you do know what it means, can you pop me a quick definition into the chat box? Got a couple of people writing. Let's see. But we see code switching happening within the classroom. And the important thing to remember is that code switching is an incredibly natural part of language. And as Asha has pointed out, yes, it's switching between L1 and L2. So it might be things like vocabulary items. It might be syntactical errors. So for example, in English, obviously, we are very subject, verb, object oriented in terms of our grammar. But in other languages, that syntax structure might be different. So you'll get a bit of interference maybe from the way that a certain language is structured. They might use the wrong structure in the English, or they might introduce a different words. It is, as Parul has exactly said, the practice of moving back and forth between two languages or two dialects at the same time. And it's natural. Adult speakers of multi-languages will do this all the time. Sometimes we feel that a certain word doesn't have an equivalent in another language. It might be that there isn't the knowledge of that language, or it might simply just be that we're tired and we can't remember the word and we know that it's going to work perfectly well. But we see through language acquisition that code switching is an important part of that. So within our classrooms, when it comes to young learners, we're going to expect to see this. This is absolutely natural. And we'll have a look a little bit later at how we can utilize that and how we can support that within the classroom. Now, as I believe it was Drusilda said in the comment, the younger we are, the easier it is. And there's plenty of evidence that shows that young learners are a sponge. They will absorb language. Um, an interesting experiment was conducted back in 1989 in the US, and it was an experiment that was conducted on a number of adult Chinese and Korean speakers within the US. All of these people had acquired English at different ages. So some of them were native speakers, some of them were bilingual Korean English speakers, others had learnt English later in life. And the experiment involved providing the learners with a number of different sentences, some of which are correct, some of which are incorrect, as we can see in this example here. Now, what the evidence showed is that the people who studied English younger were much more able to quickly and accurately identify what was good English versus bad English or incorrect English than those who studied later. The key quote here: the age of arrival in the US was a significant predictor of success on the test. The learners who became the earliest speakers achieved the highest scores on the judgment task. Those who began later were less likely to judge those sentences correctly. Now, what does that mean for us as teachers of young learners in a multilingual classroom, in a non-native English context? Because as we say, in an international school, we've got a whole variety of students. What it means for us is that the best way to support young language acquisition is to model and use the target language, whilst simultaneously providing guidance as teachers and supporting our students through that passage. So, step number one, English in the classroom, regardless of the L1s of our students. Using English in the classroom allows us as teachers to demonstrate that English is something we can use on a daily basis. It's another form of expression. We use it to communicate, just like our mother tongues. We are able to achieve the same goals through English as we can, whatever our native speaking tongue is. It can also be fun, and it opens the doors to other cultures and customs as well. Nina, welcome. You are not late. You are exactly on time for yourself. Welcome. It's lovely to see you. Okay, so let's have a think about the three things that we know for sure about young learner acquisition. As we said, young learners follow a specific pattern of grammar development. We start as native speakers, whatever our tongue is, in positive sentences. We then learn to negate. We start adding in no. No becomes not. Not becomes all of the different negative forms that we might see. But that process is a fixed process. What varies is the speed at which children achieve those steps. And as we all know, any young learner's classroom is a mixed ability classroom. We have students that are much more confident, fluent, have wider vocabularies, and others that are slower to reach those targets. The key thing to remember is that process is a natural process, and they will move through it. It's just some will advance quicker than others. To support this in the classroom, we need to encourage as much play and experimentation with language as we possibly can. And of course, context is key. And we're going to talk about context quite a lot shortly. The second thing that we know for sure is that while we have stages of development that are very clear, the edges of those stages are a bit more blurry. It's not a linear process. As children develop their language acquisition, they move back, they move forward, they move back again. They may be accurate in one area one week, but they might regress a little bit the next week. Those stages merge together. It's not a clear cut, I have finished stage 1, now I am on stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. We move between them, depending on topic areas that we're talking about, depending on our mood, the time of day, all sorts of different things. It's not a direct linear process. In the classroom, of course, this means that repetition is key to success. We need to make sure that we are providing as many opportunities to revisit language as we can. Setting the same task, but in a different way across different lessons. The third thing we know for certain about young language acquisition is that the learning that takes place is much slower. It's a much slower process than it is with adults. Adults acquire language more quickly. If you, for example, take a family, let's take a Japanese family and move that Japanese family to London. If all of the members of the family started with 0 English, what we would see is that the adults in the family would start learning and using that language very, very quickly, whereas the children would take more time. But what we know for certain is that those children will learn that language in a much deeper, more natural way than the adults will. So that learning may be slower, but the knowledge becomes more intuitive. It becomes more natural, more personal to them. Understanding comes before use. The knowledge that children have in their heads is much wider than the language that they are producing orally or in terms of their writing. They know more than they can show they know. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, differentiated learning to teach students. Yes, it's all about providing language and encouraging children to do what they can as much as possible according to their level of comfort or according to their depths of confidence. Now, here is something that I like to think about quite a lot. It's my accuracy fluency metronome. It ticks between the two. Tick, 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 tick. Let's start talking about accuracy and fluency by defining them. What would you say is the difference between accuracy and fluency? Can you pop your ideas in the chat box? Goodness me. Let's see, we've got lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of little typing names that I can see at the bottom of my screen. So what do we think is the difference between accuracy and fluency? Let's see. I think about this a lot because as a native English speaker, sometimes I'm accurate and sometimes I'm fluent. And if it's a really good day, I'm accurate and fluent in English simultaneously. Okay, here we go. Accuracy. Accuracy means grammatically perfect, whereas fluency is the pitch. Interesting. Fluency is more about speed. Accuracy is about making less mistakes. Accuracy is all about being correct, is your general feeling there. Fluency, so fluent. Do you have to be correct to be fluent? There's a question. Fluency is about speed. Agrees. Speaking without hiccups. I like that phrase, Asha. That's lovely. Using correct grammar, fluency is usually associated with speaking. Yeah. That's certainly the case. I think if we summarize it, fluency is the ability to speak with confidence um, on a number of different subjects. It doesn't necessarily require you to be grammatically correct. In fact, fluency and fluent speakers of a language are often not grammatically accurate at all times. It's the ability to express yourself, be understood, and achieve your games with confidence, at speed, within the target language. Accuracy, of course, is all about getting it right, using the right words, the right vocabulary, the right structure, in the right order, at the right time to get the result that you want. And I think that, I say it all the time, I am a native speaker of English. In that regard, I am fluent, but I'm not fluent in every single subject area. If you put me in a room with a bunch of lawyers, I won't be able to fluently hold a conversation with them about the law. If I'm feeling tired, I'm not able to get my words out all the time, and we all experience this. But of course, if I think of other languages that I am able to speak, sometimes for me as a learner, I need to make a choice. I need to make a choice between accuracy and fluency. I can't always do it. And as teachers, what this means is that we need to be very, very clear about what we want from our students. What is the objective of this activity? What is the objective of our lesson? Are we here to work on our accuracy, or is this an activity about fluency? So let's have a look at what those barriers to fluency might be. Here we go. There's a few of them. I'm sure that for those of you in the audience who are not native English speakers, some of these might be feeling quite familiar at this moment. If you think back to when you were learning English, for those of you that are native English speakers, if you think about any other languages you've ever learned, these might feel a bit familiar to you too. There are barriers to fluency. Those barriers to fluency tend to be things that are missing ingredients, if you like. So it might be that I don't know the words, I don't know the structures, I haven't learnt them yet. I have a lack of language in this subject area, prevents me from speaking fluently. Lack of time to practice, lack of time to think, lack of confidence. Am I going to get it right? What if I make a mistake? In the young learners classroom, not so much of a problem because young learners tend to be less self-aware when it comes to mistake making than adult learners, for example. Lack of opportunity, lack of motivation, and of course, we bring our experience with us as well. So, if you've had a negative experience of learning, then that might prevent you. If you've made mistakes in the past, anything that we are bringing with us can have an impact on our fluency. And of course, our mindset, our can-do attitudes, our grit and determination can have an impact on our fluency as well. Now, as I've said, these will have an impact. Not all of us face the same barriers, and not all of us have the same experiences. Each of our students will be different. But if we have a student who is less fluent than others, the chances are it's going to be one or a combination of these things that are preventing that. As teachers, of course, this means that to support fluency, we need to remove these barriers. We need to knock down this problem area and bring it back. So let's have a quick look at what we might do to support fluency in our classroom. Now, essentially, the three things that we need to be fluent are motivation. We need a reason to speak. If we don't have a reason, we don't have to say anything. Doesn't matter if we speak or not. We need an opportunity. We need the chance. We need to be given that. And we need the confidence to do that. In the classroom, um, we can do a lot of things that will help to guide and support fluency. So, doing things like allowing for pair and group work to create opportunities for that, to allow the children time to prepare their ideas, to brainstorm their thoughts, giving them the structures, the target, all of the scaffolding that they need to be able to say what they want to say. Using techniques like questioning or drama or role play to provide opportunities for our learners to use their English. And if we provide these elements within the classroom, then fluency will grow regardless of anything else. Fluency will happen. We are naturally programmed to want to communicate, and the more we communicate, the better at it we get, the more fluent we become. So what this means for us in the classroom is that our key is to work on that accuracy. Now, accuracy and fluency are equally important, and you can be accurate and not fluent. You can be fluent and not accurate. We've seen it. We're teachers. We know. We've seen these students who are very, very accurate, but who cannot have a free flowing conversation with someone. We've seen students that are completely oblivious to the mistakes that they make, but they keep talking all the time. What we want to achieve is both. So, if we are supporting fluency by introducing these things, what else can we do? There are lots and lots of different strategies that we can employ in the classroom. So I've pulled out a few examples of talking strategies from the Talk About Texts books from Macmillan. And these are lovely because each one has a different strategy that we can use to encourage fluency in the classroom. So we've got three examples here. Think aloud. So, as a teacher, demonstrating your thinking process, encouraging them to process the language and allowing for time to learn. Modeling that behavior and encouraging your students to think out loud at any point during any lesson to make those connections, to share their ideas. Peer questioning is always a great motivator. Allowing the students to create their own questions, to talk, to discuss. It's really motivating. You get the ownership of it. This is my question. I thought of it. Now I'm going to ask it. It's a very personal experience for the children. And of course, my absolute favorite, and I'm sure some of you have tried this, think, pair, share, which if you haven't tried this as an activity, I guarantee you will increase the number of students that put their hand up. It increases the number of students that give you accurate answers. And it's a really great technique for encouraging students to work fluently, because essentially it allows processing time mentally in the think section. And while we're thinking, we're not talking, we're not writing. Maybe we're making notes, maybe we're doodling, but it's all about thinking. It's all about getting as many ideas as we can. The pairing exercise, of course, gives us the opportunity to experiment, to try out those new ideas in a safe environment between our friends, between our classmates. Before, of course, then we come to the sharing, which allows for the children to say, after all of that practice, what it is they've been talking about. So if you do want to get more fluency, try a few of those. Now, let's bring it back to accuracy. Number one thing that we need to maintain when we are teaching new language and encouraging students to use it is context. Context is everything. Without context, without a background, grammar is meaningless. There is no structure, and the English language, of course, is a nightmare to learn. As all of you will know, the past tense doesn't mean we're talking about the past. Um, there is no such thing as a future tense, and without context, we can be misunderstood a lot, even as native speakers. So, context helps us make sense of grammar. It helps us understand how language is used. And for children, the how is the most important thing for us to learn. I'd say for adults too. How we use the language, why we're using the language, that is the most important thing we're going to learn about it. Context helps us make learning memorable. And of course, when it comes to context, the clearer and simpler that context is, the better. And very, very most important thing, one lesson, one context. Why? Our young learners are still developing their brains. They don't have the same ability to imagine, to empathize as adults do. They haven't developed fully their ability to put themselves into an imaginary situation. As children, we are still very much focused on the real world that surrounds us. Ideas, imagination, empathy, these skills are growing and we are developing them and we are practicing them and we're learning them in the classroom, but we have not yet got the fully developed brain capacity to master these things. So, as much as possible, when we're setting context around language, we need to make sure that that context is clear, that it applies for the whole lesson, and that we are able to connect with the children on that. It should be recognizable to them. We can't imagine something we have no concept of. So, why do we implement context? Those are some very good reasons. When do we do it? Well, for teachers, there are 3 times where context gets introduced. As a teacher, usually, most of the time, when we're setting context, we'll do that at the beginning of the lesson. And when we talk about context, we need to remember that a context is an idea, not a subject area. So, conjunctions is not a context, but conjunctions are and can be used in any context. So, for us as teachers, we just choose something. Our context, for example, could be the park, and our subject area is that conjunction practice. So connecting sentences together with and, but, because, etc. When do we set that context? Well, most commonly, as we've said, at the beginning of class. We'll start our lesson by showing a picture of the park or talking about the park with our children, and then we will introduce the grammatical subjects. Of course, we might also use a flipped classroom model to set our context. So we might send them a video to watch at home before the lesson, and that video will set the context, allowing us then to start our lesson with that context already fixed and with the students having some ideas around the topic. The third opportunity for setting context is, of course, when we need to. And we have, I am sure, all experienced the joy of young learners asking questions we did not expect to answer today. Children are curious. Children think in different ways to adults quite often. And we often find as teachers that we might need to, on the spot, answer questions we did not plan for or predict. I'm sure that many of you have had this experience in the past. But of course, whenever we do that, we need to contextualize what we're teaching. So as teachers, we might set the context at the beginning of class, we might set the context ahead of the class, or we might find ourselves in the middle of the classroom having to apply a context in the spur of the moment, reacting to what our students have done or said or asked. What does that actually mean? How do we actually do it? Well, context setting in a young learner's classroom is very much a multisensory experience, let's say. We can do it through realia, bringing things in, getting real objects, real experiences into the classroom to help them understand. Talking about past experiences, of course, will help children contextualize. So asking questions of, do any of you have a pet at home? Yes, I have cat, I have this, I have that. Brilliant. Giving them something concrete to talk about. Images, of course, are an amazing way of setting context. We have the phrase in English, a picture paints 1,000 words. I'm sure in the variety of languages that we have represented, most of you in your language will have an equivalent idiom. Images are an incredibly powerful way to help set context. And of course, for the world of 2020, if you're teaching from home, try this technique. Turn your background on Zoom into whatever you are. Place yourself underwater if you're talking about fish. Put yourself in a park. Put yourself in a forest. You can use those flat images and those flat videos behind you to help make that context feel more realistic to the students in a way that we could never do in a physical classroom, which is quite exciting. Unless, of course, your school has a green screen. Another great way of setting context with young learners is through stories. And stories, historically, have always been used to teach, to contextualize. As humans, way, 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 way back in cave times, we had stories to teach and we had stories that set a context. And to this day, most effective way of doing it. And then, of course, video will also help. And if you are using a blended learning model, then don't be afraid to send those videos before class. Allow the children to experience what they're seeing. Give them a bit of a head start, as it were, ready for the lessons as well. Now, that's the how of setting context. Let's have a look at this realistically. So here is an example from a book called Grammar Rules 2. So Unit 10 there, and in this book, in this chapter, the topic area is being and having verbs. So this is AB, it has, it is, etc. sentences. Practicing those structures. The context, of course, is bees. So we've used an image of the bee, we've got all of the labeling, all of the vocabulary is there, and we're talking about bees to practice those being and having verbs. Again, you might use the honeycomb as your background. Where am I? I'm in a beehive hanging out with the queen. We might watch a video about bees. We might read a story about bees. All of that will set the context, which allows us to teach the grammar point. But remember, the grammar point in and of itself is not a context. Every grammar point needs to be framed within a subject that we can talk about and we can demonstrate. Okay, so a little question for you all. Up on the screen, we've got some key language terminology, our jargon. As literacy and language teachers, these are some of our most important words. I have a little poll for you, so I'm going to pop that up on the screen now. I'd like you to have a look at this question. Do you use grammar terminology when teaching young learners? And you've got 3 possible answers there. So have a look at those 3 choices and pop your answer in the box. In a moment, I will share that result with you. Yeah, some of you, if you can't vote because you're on a mobile, that's fine. Just pop your answers in. So we've got a couple of 2s coming through here. Mostly 2s, mostly 2s. Some of them, there's a couple of no's, a couple of 3s. Yep, I'm just going to give it 30 more seconds for those of you that want to click on the poll to answer. We've got, 34% of you answered, 36%. Well, let's see. Give you 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to end the voting and share these results. So, as you can see, most of you are in the 2 group. Yes, we use grammar terminology, but we simplify things. And I would absolutely say that number 2 is our best option in the young learners classroom. Every subject area has terminology. In mathematics lessons, we teach words like addition, we teach words like subtraction, multiplication, times, minus, all of these key words that belong to mathematics. They are the language of mathematics, and the same thing applies in science, in art, in music, in whatever subject. Language is a subject with terminology. Those terms help us. And if I pop back to our presentation, let's take those off the screen. Oh, back at the beginning. There we go. Give me 1 second. Oh, there we are. So yes, terminology. These words help us in the classroom. And there is no reason why children are too young. These words might be complicated, but they're not too young for the ideas. And going back to the wonderful book Grammar Rules, the author Tanya Gibb in the Teacher's Guide had this to say: all subjects have terminology, including maths, visual art, music, science. Without terminology, students and teachers are limited in their capacity to talk about the language of a text. Making grammar terminology a regular part of classroom discussions enables students to become more comfortable with it as it becomes more familiar to them. Now, most of you, said, yes, I teach terminology, but I simplify things. And that's always been my route as well. It's the way I learned when I was in school. We don't necessarily have to teach the phrase conjunctions. We can talk about linking words or connecting words. We don't have to talk about verbs in terms of, we don't have to use those words. We can talk about doing words, thinking words, feeling words, being words, etc. We can simplify the idea. We can simplify that core language. But the idea should always be that we enable the children to talk about what they are doing, because that enables us to help them to learn. It enables us to give more effective feedback. It enables the children to have a better understanding of what they're doing. And as it says right here, it enables us to talk about those texts, those conversations that we're having, to talk about that language. Without those words and without those ideas, we cannot encourage that accuracy to the same extent. Which brings us to the final thing we need to talk about in this situation, in this session, which is the idea of mistakes and error correction and feedback. And given what we have said so far about how language acquisition follows a process, about how we as children are naturally programmed to acquire language, how we as children can learn language in a much deeper way than an adult can learn, what we do have to say is that there will be slips, mistakes, but there will also be code switching as well. We will see the mother tongue appearing in the classroom. So what do we need to do as teachers? How can we best support this? Well, two things that we need to become masters of as young learners teachers: recasting and rephrasing. As we can see here, recasting is the technique of dealing with that code switching, dealing with the L1 in the classroom. So if our student says to us, "Teacher, I need kitab." Okay, great. The child has a need that we need to fix as the teacher, as the adult present. We know that the child has a need. The child has attempted to make as much English as possible in this sentence, but clearly the child is lacking the one word. So as teachers, we need to A, recognize and respond to the child's request. That's our job as an adult. As a teacher, we need to show that we have understood what they're saying, give that positive encouragement for the amount of English that they have given. But also, we need to encourage that full English usage. And the best way of doing this is through recasting. So when the student says to us, "Teacher, I need kitab," we as teachers start with that positive reinforcement. Yes, that number one is yes. I'm giving you positive acknowledgement. Yes, you do need your book. There it is, that keyword. I've repeated the same structure. Thank you, Ardak, commenting on my pronunciation of kitab there. Yes, lovely. You do need your book. We do need to give that positive reinforcement. And by doing this, by recasting into English, we are showing you are doing the right thing. I am approving what you're doing. You will get what you need, but let's try doing it this way. I can understand you. You can be one step better by changing the word kitab to book. Boom. Rephrasing is very, very similar. When we're rephrasing, we're dealing with mistakes or slips. And two things to remember about mistakes. Number one, it's only a mistake if you know the correct answer. If they are trying and experimenting, this is not a mistake at all. This is experimentation. This is ambition. This is trying hard to say the things you want to say without the language. Most mistakes the young learners make, they are slips. They have a lot of information in here, but they have more information in here than they can get out. So when we're rephrasing, the key point is our tone and our intonation. So when the child says to us, "In the story, crocodile goed to the park." Okay, we've made some good strides here. We've got a couple of little areas. So again, with the rephrasing, positive reinforcement. That's right. Number one, positive. And then we bring in our intonation. So we've got two mistakes. First of all, we've got a missing article. We're talking about the crocodile. So when we're saying that's right, the crocodile, intonation, underlined, emphasized. Went to the park. Again, add that emphasis. And of course, as Faradunisa has said, beginning with the positive response encourages the learner to try. It registers faster. Absolutely. It's a lot more of an encouraging behavior. Getting your intonation in to show those things and using those ideas will help those children to reformulate. Now, when it comes to error correction and encouraging accuracy, the first thing that we need to do is ask ourselves if it needs correcting. And when it comes to the young learners classroom, and to be honest, when it comes to any classroom in the world, it needs correcting if A, communication is being prevented, i.e., no one can understand without this correction. Number two, if we are focused on accuracy. If we answer yes to either of those questions in the moment, then we should correct. If the answer to those questions is no, then as teachers, our best strategy is to make a mental note of what the children said, what the mistake was, where was the problem, and pop it in our back pocket. Come back to it later, collect them up, revisit at another time. Because we cannot stop every single mistake, because that prevents fluency. We have to find that balance between accuracy and fluency. How accurate do I want my students to be? How fluent do I want my students to be? If it needs correcting now, then there are a few things that we need to remember. Number one, as we've said, be positive, give praise, positive reinforcement. They are making an effort to speak in the classroom. They're making an effort to use this new language. We need to reward them for that. So positive and praise. Gestures and facial expressions are very, very useful. We can use that to help the children identify where their mistakes are. We can show them visually, like, yeah. We can ask questions to the rest of the class using our faces. Important thing to remember, in 2020, realistically, a lot of us are teaching online now, and on a screen with 15, 20, 40 faces, as a teacher, some of those visuals and those gestures may not get noticed in the same way that they would in a regular classroom. If you're teaching online, if you're teaching a lot online, it's very, very useful to consider a pause signal for children. So, you want them to stop saying what they're saying, but just for a minute. So that might be, make it, how do I do that in the camera? There we go. Let a P signal, like a timeout. You don't want to be stopping them by saying that, because that's fairly abrupt. But if you can give them a little signal, it could be visual, it could be a noise that will indicate that actually, hang on, there's something we need to correct here before you continue. Always a good way. Always get the children to repeat the corrected sentences. Whether you are recasting or rephrasing, the validity of that and the usefulness of that will depend on that child repeating the corrected sentence back to you. Children are all crazy. We know we're not necessarily going to get them to do it every single time, but if you aim for that, sometimes you're like, okay, right, fine, the child is not going to say that. It's like, I forgot my kit up. You forgot your book. Yes, my kit up. Okay, right, I can go 5-10 minutes having this conversation, or I can just say, okay, for now, we'll put it to one side. But as much as possible, get the child to correct. And finally, in terms of the top tip for correcting errors, make sure that they are checking understanding through examples. Get them to give you as many examples as possible to show their understanding. All right. So we are pretty much at the end of the session. We've got a little bit of time for questions. And if you do have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat box. now, and I will try and answer as many as I can. Oh, and you are all so kind, really. All of these nice words that you're typing in the chat box. So much love. Couldn't do it without you. Really, you can only be a good presenter if you've got a good audience to have there. So yes, lots of technical questions, which I will allow Rainer to talk about in a moment. But yes, you do get the PDF, and there is also a recording, so you will be able to see this. Lots and lots of thank yous, thank you, thank yous. You're all amazing. Thank you. Give it a couple of seconds just in case you do have any questions. Seems like no questions. So I'm going to hand over to Rainer, who will give you a little bit of information about upcoming things and follow-up information regarding the session. Thank you all.
So much. I like the singing there, Charlotte, as well. It's quite melodic. Thank you so much to Charlotte, as always, for a fantastic webinar, and also for the session itself. If you would like to know more about us, please do feel free to visit our website, and of course to know more about our upcoming webinars, and also do follow us on social media. If you have any questions about our primary resources, do also email and let us know. And also, just as Charlotte mentioned as well, the PowerPoint and the CPD certificate will be made available by email as soon as the session. So just to say thank you so much again to Charlotte, thank you so much to the attendees as always, and we look forward to seeing you joining a session soon. Take care, bye.